Indian Prairie is a small remnant of an oak savanna that sits atop one of the few remaining bluffs along the Milwaukee River in what is now Clutch Park in the city of Glendale. For countless generations, American Indians lived, died, and were buried along this bluff. Indeed, when the first European settlers arrived, they found Indian villages up and down all three of our rivers, and numerous Indian tribes gathered here. Milwaukee was the good land, the gathering place by the water. The first people to make a map of the Milwaukee Township noted that Indian Prairie was in fact an oak opening. Oak openings are also called oak savannas, and they refer to very special areas that exist through the hand of human beings. They are mostly grassland with sparse tree cover, usually oaks, that always imply a long and intimate relationship between people and land, in which they burn land for their agricultural use. The other side of the river was a low floodplain. Oak savannas once covered 50 million acres of the Midwest. Now, they're one of the most threatened communities in the world. There are only two small fragments left here in Milwaukee, Indian Prairie and the Stahl-Conrad homestead. Oak savannas are fantastic habitat for birds. Oak savannas are cultural landscapes. They always reflect an intimate connection between peoples and the land. They exist because of the hand of man. Wisconsin's first scientist, Increase Lapham, visited Indian Prairie in the 1850s and described a remarkable sight. In the center were two large earth mounds, 53 feet in diameter, 8 feet tall, with the southern mound having a 25-foot platform at the top. Of course, it was a prairie, as in its name, meaning a lightly covered grassland, with the advancing woodlands. Woodlands take over prairies when humans stop the same agricultural practices as in the past. And over on the side, a 30-foot bank to the Milwaukee River. There were also numerous excavations, or intaglios, cut into the earth. In other words, shapes like the shapes of Indian mounds, but cut into the earth rather than built up from the earth. Was no other place like this in Wisconsin. At the north end was a permanent creek. This permanent creek would have drained springs. There's no other way a creek could be permanent and be so short. And it would have landed in the Milwaukee River right at the spot of the ancient canoe landing for Indian Prairie. While this land has been filled in today, evidence of that creek is still here, with a pipe constantly draining 500 gallons an hour, 12,000 gallons a day. Increase Lapham noted that many recently placed American Indian burials were on top of the mounds. There was a Menominee Indian village very nearby. Indeed, Indian Prairie has served as a burial site for American Indians for countless generations. Not too far north from the Indian Mound portion of Indian Prairie are numerous Indian garden beds, long strips of earth that were raised as part of their agricultural practices. Nobody was completely certain where Indian Prairie was because Increase Lapham did not tie it into anything other than the Milwaukee River. However, archaeologist Charles Brown came here in 1905 and sketched in Bender Road, giving us now accurate placement of the Lapham map onto a modern Google Earth projection. And now we know precisely where all the Indian mounds were. In the later 1800s, the European settlers arrived. The Bender family built this mill right at the mouth of the small creek at the site of the logical canoe landing for Indian Prairie, and rapidly most of the mounds disappeared as the farmers used them for topsoil. In 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps constructed an artificial waterfall right at Indian Prairie. to this day, that waterfall is an iconic symbol of the city of Glendale. While beautiful, this waterfall is in fact an impediment to the free passage of fish, which is of great concern to environmental organizations such as the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Natural Resources, Milwaukee River Keeper, Milwaukee Audubon Society, and Glendale Natural Heritage Committee. To address this problem, Milwaukee County Parks proposed placing a fish passage along the west bank of the river at Indian Prairie. They would haul away 10,000 cubic yards of Indian Prairie, chop down 10 ancient oaks older than the state of Wisconsin, and convert them into park benches. Well, the public was horrified by this proposal. It would have extended 400 feet north of the Kletch Park Dam and 200 feet south of the Kletch Park Dam to the point of the ancient canoe landing of Indian Prairie, and it would have destroyed this portion of the bluff. County parks did have archaeologists investigate the area where the proposed project was to be placed, and they determined that the proposal would not impact any archaeological remains. However, the National Register criteria for historic places states that as long as the landscape remains, the feeling of the place doesn't change regardless of the presence or absence of mounds. Because of the discontent with the first proposal, Milwaukee County Parks presented in the fall of 2019 a second proposal which would call for cutting a notch 23.5 feet into the western bank of the waterfall at the side of the bluff of Indian Prairie and leave the remainder of the waterfall unchanged. They would then place 3 parallel walls, 400 feet length, of steel pilings along the bank of the Milwaukee River. Now, while this is a very pretty picture, in fact, none of these ancient oaks would be able to survive this. This is the reality on the ground. Imagine a road big enough for construction equipment to drive along the river bank here. Clearly, none of these ancient oaks would survive that kind of construction. Apparently, the county parks team feels that we would prefer a viewing platform like this rather than like this. As part of the proposal, they have designed a number of ADA, American with Disabilities Act, platforms to allow people with disabilities to actually put their hand in the water. However, National Park Service guidelines state that features that are character defining, like topographic variation and vegetation, should be identified first. Well, what is more topographical or more indicative of vegetation than a 30-foot bluff and ancient oak trees older than the state of Wisconsin? These should be preserved. In other words, this proposal would be fine in a brownfield development, not on an ancient bluff. The United States has many fantastic historical places. Not all are ADA accessible. Mesa Verde is not accessible. However, the platform from which this picture was taken is accessible. The Glendale Natural Heritage Committee considers that the top of the bluff at Indian Prairie is a fantastic accessible view over the Milwaukee River. This is its current view, mostly invasive buckthorn plants, but with just 30 minutes of work, a fantastic view was opened up to the other side, to the floodplain area that's only 3 feet above the water. Niagara Falls here has miles of accessible viewing stands, but if you want to put your hand in the water at the bottom of the falls, that is not accessible. Well, what about putting a fish passage on the east bank? The east bank, which is only a few feet above river level and does not have the ancient cultural remains that the 30-foot bluff of Indian Prairie has. Milwaukee Audubon Society and the Glendale Natural Heritage Committee proposed placing a fish passage on the east side of the dam and arranged for purchase of the private land to help make this possible. However, the engineers working for the county parks informed us that while it was possible for them to place a passage through the 30-foot bluff on the west side of the dam, it was not possible by their hydrographic and hydrologic analysis to place a similar passage on the east side of the dam. The Glendale Natural Heritage Committee would like a second opinion and has started a GoFundMe project in order to hire an engineer to study the possibility of placing a passage on the east bank of the Milwaukee River. Milwaukee County is blessed with many architectural gems. This historic Ravine Road Bridge was built in 1905. It started to show some of its age, and in 2016 Milwaukee County engineers studied it and said this bridge should come down. The Friends of Lake Park said, well, we would like a second opinion, and they got one. And now, in 2019, they announced that the Lake Park Bridge will be saved. In a similar fashion, we would like to preserve Indian Prairie.